Hello and welcome to this session titled Developing Systems Thinking Leaders in Multidisciplinary Undergraduate Strategic Leadership Seminar. My name is Jen Robinson. I am the session host for this time together. By joining today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with TLC-related materials. Microphones will be muted for this presentation, but we encourage you to post questions and comments in the chat. Also, we have enabled live transcription. If you would like to use it, click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Now I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Brandy Bryson and Chelsea Wedwick from Appalachia State University. I will turn the floor over to our presenters.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jen. I will go ahead and get our screen set up here as I am also introducing ourselves. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that you're able to see the slides here? Okay, perfect. So as Jen mentioned, I'm Dr. Brandy Bryson, Professor of Leadership and Educational Studies at Appalachian State University. And I am also in the world of consulting work around culture and climate issues, coaching executive leaders, particularly around inclusive climates, etc. So I've been able to bring in some of that experience to this course and may draw a couple of references to that as well. And I will turn it over to Chelsea.
Hello, everyone, wherever you are. I'm zooming in from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Chelsea Wedwick. I'm a K-12 visual arts educator. Right now I teach elementary school art, which is the cutest thing in the world. And I'm also a doctoral student at Appalachian State University. So this past summer, I had the wonderful opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Bryson, and we're going to share the course that we created with you today. And today's sessions, we'll be monitoring the chat and we'll be responding as well. So please post any questions, any comments. And if you could just take a moment and introduce yourself, where are you coming from? Where are you located? If you have an affiliation with a university or an institution, put that in the chat so we kind of know where you're coming from and who we're connecting with. And we'll get started.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chelsea. So let's dive in to a little bit about the course that we developed. So this was a 10-week interdisciplinary honors seminar. The course was titled Strategic Leadership for Inclusive Excellence. It explored the principles and practices of strategic leadership. So things that we oftentimes see in maybe an organizational leadership program, management, College of Management or management major, sort of combined with sort of a DEI or inclusive excellence focus. It was designed for students from all academic backgrounds. And the course objectives was for students to engage with foundational and contemporary leadership theories, examine how individual and group identities impact leadership and organizational experiences, and develop the skills to assess and influence organizational culture and climate. So we really tried to stay broad, but then offer some specificities around transferable skills for students to develop. So when we were working on the course design, of course, we were thinking about Senge's systems thinking. So of course, this is the intellectual bedrock of Senge's model, the fifth discipline. And we were looking at this systems thinking because it integrates and gives coherence to the other four dimensions of the model. So for us, it was really central in thinking about course design and development. And again, thinking about systems thinking as both a conceptual framework and a set of tools that can help people see beyond sort of isolated events or even isolated aspects of knowledge to really seeing patterns and systemic structures. We were also focused on interconnectedness, where we were thinking about every element of the course connected to other elements of the course, either directly or indirectly. We were looking at changes or gaps in one part, right? Whether that's one part of leadership that affects the whole or one part of the course design that could affect the whole. And we were really focused on feedback loops. So the reinforcing, the balancing, and those loops both driving learning, again, learning in the course, as well as behavior. So thinking specifically about some of those leadership behaviors. And of course, thinking about course design, we were thinking about pedagogy. So the classroom as a learning organization where new and expansive patterns of thinking were nurtured, People were continually learning to see the whole together in the space. So we want to show this is probably going to be a little bit difficult to read. So this is more of a visual representation than it is reading. But what we have here is a spreadsheet that has our horizontal curriculum. And Chelsea is actually going to put a version of this into the chat so you can have access to it. But as we were developing this horizontal curriculum, we were really focused on thinking about how to introduce them to concepts of inclusive excellence leadership. So what is leadership? Thinking about transformational leadership, how inclusive excellence connected to that. And then thinking about the ways in which both individual and group-based culture and organizational culture sort of overlap. We then moved into looking at leadership theories, types of power and influence, social and emotional intelligence. We gave them a little bit of time then to start thinking about their final project, which Chelsea is going to talk about in a little bit. We also looked at followership and what the research tells us that followers actually want to see from leaders. Sometimes this is a missed opportunity in leadership courses when we don't talk enough about followers and followership. Then we looked at strategic planning, change management, and change assessment, and then helping them throughout the end of the term to really think about their final project. The next piece that I wanted to show is, again, thinking about how all of this worked together in thinking about the course design as well as developing leaders. And so we have this course design or pedagogical strategy that really was connected to our systems thinking model. The systems thinking model, of course, being interconnected with interconnectedness, or reciprocally connected to interconnectedness and reciprocally connected to feedback loops. And all of those things really informing that process of personal mastery that we were trying to support the students in developing as they were thinking about and working on their skills toward leadership development that again informed the systems thinking piece. So for example, we wanted them to understand how a particular leadership style was connected to types of power and influence, the ways in which types of power and influence are utilized. And also thinking about the ways in which a leader uses their power to influence can be directly connected to their social and emotional intelligence. So those actions in turn create these feedback loops that influence a follower's behaviors and perceptions of a leader, among other things. Pedagogically, we scaffolded the theory to practice to personal self-assessments, allowing students opportunities to give and receive feedback on their understanding of both the content and the knowledge development that they were experiencing throughout the course. So I just want to pause before I move on and we get into some of the student data and just see if you have any questions about how we've kind of set this up and explained our course design. Okay, I will move on. So one of the things that was really important to us was to conduct a summative student reflection survey. And we did this for two main reasons. First, students often lose sight of content from the beginning of the semester. And so it was really important to us that we positioned the survey the week before the final project was due. And this was purposed for them to look back at course materials and think about their final project, the paper component of their final project, where they really had to integrate course concepts and materials in their writing in a sophisticated way. So we wanted to kind of jog their memories, jog their brains about what we had covered. And so this summative student reflection really asked that they go back through our course materials and respond to specific aspects of those weeks, those modules, and the course materials within them. Secondly, since this was the first time we taught this course, We also wanted to know what the students enjoyed, what they benefited from the most, and what fell flat. Something always falls flat the first time you teach a course. So that's why we wanted to, that was in part why we wanted to do this. So the next part of the survey actually asked them to select the 3 topics which they had just reflected on that contributed most to their learning and the 3 topics that contributed least to their learning. We also asked them to explain why they ranked the topics in this way. And finally, we asked them to identify the activities and assignments that contributed most to their learning. So we were looking at topics and then assignments and activities. So let's look at some of those findings here with the course content. So about 90% of students indicated that types of power and influence was the topic that contributed most to their learning. And then we see social and emotional intelligence. A little over half of the students mentioned that, along with leadership theories and change management. So these were the 4 biggest topics that were indicated in terms of contributions to learning. There were also 3 other topics mentioned, but not necessarily as often as these. Those 3 were organizational culture, followership, and strategic planning. So then, of course, we wanted to know about activities and assignments. So we asked them about the activities and assignments that contributed most to their learning. And it was, again, about 80%, 85% said the chapter activities contributed most to their learning, with a close second being large group discussions and breakout room discussions. And this was really interesting to us because we had some students say, you know, I'm a science major. I'm not used to showing up in a discussion-based classroom. At first, I was pretty nervous about sharing and talking in class. But I really learned a lot through that process and became comfortable in being able to do that. Interestingly, what you see from this data is that the types of power paper seem to be reported last here, at least in this distribution. And so despite the fact that types of power and influence was actually ranked as their #1 topic. So we thought that that was kind of an interesting, potentially contradiction here with what the students were reporting. So let's take a look at some of the components that we covered for types of power and influence. We're actually going to give you all like 2 minutes to complete an activity that we shared with students and to share out. So we would love for you all to engage in that if you feel comfortable doing so. But first, I'll cover a little bit of the content. So when we talk about types of power and influence, you know, we're thinking about the 2 categories of hard power and soft power. And under that, you know, legitimate, reward, and coercive power as part of hard power versus expert and referent power in soft power. And so this is a model that, you know, I don't think any of our students had been exposed to, but what we were really hoping that they would get from this content is, you know, how to be a leader in a way that is more relational and uses more of that soft power. And so, of course, we presented them with research. We presented them with cases, but ultimately we wanted them to be able to apply their knowledge around types of power and influence. So the paper that they had to write for this module just had them to define each of the 5 power types and how they function, of course, using course materials to be able to justify their points. We had them reflect briefly on their responses to an activity using a DAFT chapter. What power signals do you send is the name of the activity. Chelsea's going to put that in the chat for us. And then they had to end their paper assignment by writing a case study. So they had to write their own individual case, or own original case study, and provide an example of either a leader that they've known in the past or a fictitious leader using each of these types of power. So remember, we know that this is the topic that tended to, you know, contribute most to their learning, but the assignment itself was reported as something that didn't necessarily contribute to their learning. So we thought that that was really interesting. Here is the activity, types of power and influence. What power signals do you send? So Chelsea has added that to the chat. If you just want to take like a minute or two, look this over, complete this, and then we'll come back together and share the prompts that we shared with the students in the course. You want to just give us a thumbs up when you've had enough time. That would be super helpful. Okay, I see a few thumbs. So the questions that we posed to the students, both in small breakout rooms, and then we came back together to discuss. So if you remember, they reported that those those large group discussions in those breakout rooms were really beneficial in their learning. So this was kind of an example of what we posed for them. So of course we asked, was your score higher in hard power or soft power categories? How do you make sense of this? And what might you need to do to create more balance or work on an area of improvement? So if, of course, you can tell from the link that Chelsea put in the chat, the ones on the left are more indicative of hard power styles. The ones on the right are more indicative of soft power and influence styles. So we will pose those questions for you all here. Was your score higher in the hard power or soft power categories? How do you make sense of this? And what might you need to do to create more balance or work on an area of improvement? Would anybody like to unmute and share here?
I can get the ball rolling.
Thanks,
As
Jamie.
Yeah, as I was looking at these, I thought it really depends on my position at the time. For example, I'm a program chair, but if I'm speaking with my department head, how I interact in that is going to be different. But I'm kind of even. So the hard skills are 9, soft are 6, but it really gave me some perspectives to start thinking about um, as I move forward.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. And that really, that response, we got that as well in class. And I think that response really helped us to then tie back to some of those leadership theories and help them to think about situational leadership, right? And how hard power is not inherently bad, and only having soft power is not necessarily going to help a leader to be effective, right? And so being able to reflect on that with students in real time, allowing them to have conversations with their peers in breakout rooms without Chelsea and I necessarily present in those breakout rooms. So that was super helpful to come back to the importance of situational leadership. Does anybody else want to share out? See, Joanna has in the chat 2 for hard power, 10 for soft power. So definitely more of that relational style leadership. And some of our students were very surprised about how much they leaned toward one or the other. And so that was something that they were able to come back to multiple times throughout the semester as we talked about various other topics in the course. And then as they worked on their strategic plans at the end of the course, as well as some of their other reflections. All right, thank you all. We will, Jen, you make a good point. It also depends if leadership is with faculty or with students. Yes, definitely. Absolutely. So thinking then about these interconnected activities, we were really wanting to create these layered learning feedback loops. So concepts from the reading that we discussed in breakout groups and large group that allowed them to have a little more information and fodder, if you will, for reflecting on in their writing. And then, of course, being applied through those case studies that they developed. So one quote from a student in the summative reflection stated, "Though hard power can be good and effective, it can be negative if not balanced with soft power. Learning about types of power gave me the opportunity to see that I love to take charge and use my control in a situation. But this means that I am less emotionally connected and have a hard time integrating collaboration in my leadership style. In this course, I have realized that inclusive leadership requires more than my own ideas and control and needs understanding of others and creating a workplace where there is a sense of belonging and purpose for all." So this was, we felt like was one of our success quotes that we wanted to highlight. Of course, not all of them were quite in tune with the interconnectedness of the components of the course, but quite a few of them were, and we thought that this was a good example, thinking specifically about hard and soft power and how it's connected to types of influence and other elements from the course. So I'm now going to turn it over to Chelsea to talk about social and emotional intelligence.
Thank you. This was another central topic that resonated deeply with our undergraduate students this summer. And that was highlighted in the chart. A little bit above 50% of our students connected with this topic. And as we guided students through this topic, we wanted them to not only understand how emotional intelligence was conceptually, but how it applied to experience in personal and professional competency and leadership. I would be really interested in those who are in leadership if this is an element of your courses, if this topic comes up in your leadership courses. We thought it was really important to recognize it as a cornerstone of effective leadership, collaboration, and overall just their well-being. So we knew that these skills were really essential to move beyond our virtual classroom that we had this summer. And whether it was education, business, whatever setting, we wanted our students to have the ability to understand and manage their emotions and really navigate relationships with others in leadership. So how did we do that? And what model did we use? We used the emotional intelligence model by Daniel Goleman, and that's represented on this slide. And he breaks this down into 4 interrelated quadrants, each representing a distinct but interconnected domain. We have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. We found this model particularly valuable because it has a really good structure. It's research-based way to explain how emotional intelligence operates, both internally through awareness and regulation of one's emotions, and externally through empathy, communication, and relationship building. What we found that this framework was engaging for students was its clear connection to personal insight and impact. So for example, understanding one's emotions and triggers and that self-awareness is the foundation for managing them effectively, and that self-management, which kind of enhances one's capacity for empathy and communication. Critical skills for leaders, right? So when students saw how these components built upon each other, they started making connections between their own experiences that they really defined as effective, emotionally intelligent leaders. And if you look up at the self-awareness in the upper left green quadrant, that contains the self-awareness of one's internal states, preferences, resources, intuition, and it has 3 components: emotional self-awareness, recognizing one's emotions and their efforts; accurate self-assessment, understanding one's strengths and limitations; and self-confidence, possessing a strong sense of self-worth and capability. If you move right down below that into self-management, the purple quadrant, that contains the ability to regulate one's emotions, impulses, and even access their own resources. So this has the emotional regulation, keeping disruptive emotions and impact and impulses kind of in check, the trustworthiness, acting with integrity and alignment to one's values, adaptability, remaining flexible and composed amidst change, which I think that is something a lot of us might deal with. I know that is something I'm dealing with. Optimism, maintaining persistence, and a positive outlook despite challenges, and initiative, taking proactive action on opportunities. These were in the self-awareness and the behavior interconnected model. If you shift over into the upper right orange quadrant in social awareness, the other, moving away from internal view to external, it really concerns one's ability to understand others' emotions, their needs, and their perspectives. This has empathy, sensing and understanding other people's feelings, their point of views, awareness of others, being able to read emotions and power dynamics within a group, and service orientation, anticipating and responding to others' needs. Very essential skills for leaders. And then moving down to that dark blue relational management quadrant, focusing on one's ability to influence, inspire, and collaborate effectively with others. This contained influence, the overall effective persuasive strategies, which really tied into using and utilizing the soft and hard powers as a leader, communication, clearly expressing ideas and information, conflict management, resolving disagreements constructively, collaboration, working together, and then change catalyst, leading and facilitating organizational change. Once we had this model, when we introduced this to the students, we wanted them to check, well, where's your emotional intelligence? Where do you land in these quadrants? So we had them complete this survey. After completing the survey, we had them there was about 4 questions that related to Goleman's model in here. And Dr. Bryson added that link in there if you want to take it. We're not going to talk about it. I think sometimes emotional intelligence can be a little bit impersonal, or it can be a little bit too personal for ones to be introduced at a quick conference meeting, but we want you to have access to that and kind of go through what is your emotional intelligence. After the students completed this activity, we helped them analyze, where do you land in your emotional intelligence? 4 of the questions landed in each one of the quadrants. And once they were able to self-assess, what areas were they confident in, which areas were they skilled in, or where did they need a little bit more development? So for example, if they felt like they scored very high in self-awareness in that green quadrant, they're like, oh, I might be really good at understanding my emotions, what triggers me. And then I might have scored really low in relational management, suggesting that they need strategies for communication and collaboration. That was also kind of highlighted in the quote that Dr. Bryson introduced earlier. And we chose this model so that it provided a clear, specific framework for understanding emotional intelligence. Once they understood their strengths and their weaknesses, we moved into an activity to help them understand and build upon this. This is in their emotional self-awareness. And this is a quick activity that we did that helped them identify their emotions, which we call them primary emotions, the happy, the sad, the angry, and build their vocabulary into the secondary and tertiary, more complex feelings. So this gave them vocab and rich abilities to build upon there. And this feelings wheel really went into how they identified with learning to lead with emotional awareness. And this is I'll read this quote pretty quick. And this activity highlighted areas of improvement for me, specifically navigating my emotions. I tended to become defensive or not realize my emotions until later. Because I place a high value on my relationships and leading with soft power, I tend to react more strongly when I sense that someone I respect is unhappy with my work. This ties into confidence and being successful to lead with soft power without being taken advantage of. And these little activities really built upon each other to have them have a culminating final project. In this final project, there was 4 aspects. There was the surveys, interview interview notes, paper, and a strategic plan. We invited them to become conceptual consultants, to have this like virtual little imaginary title, but to use real world data and real world organizations. So they were invited to survey 5 people at the same workplace. In this, we had them complete a Google survey that they sent out and had domains from our course: workplace culture and climate, leadership styles, social emotional intelligence, type of power, and what followers want. After that initial data set, they were able to select 2 people to interview. After that interview, or during that interview process, they were able to use that survey and make really specific interview questions. They had 3 common questions. One, you mentioned in your survey responses that the culture and climate of your workplace are blank. Can you tell us more about that? How do you describe strengths and weaknesses in your supervisor? What motivates you to come to work each day? And then they could add their own. A lot of them used their summer internships, places of employment to do the surveys and interviews. Afterwards, they incorporated this into a paper. They used those 2 data points for written analysis and reflection. The written analysis, they summarized their findings and analyzed them and said, okay, what do I need to fix here? As my consultant hat, what do I need to do? And they sandwiched a strategic plan in there. And they have a reflective conclusion. In the strategic plan, this highlighted their consultant, their invisible or their imaginary consultantship of what they were going to do. They used this template to create a strategic plan based on the data from their surveys and interviews. They created SMART goals. We practiced those in class, moving from general to results oriented to their data, and they had a brief rationale. So for example, one student identified miscommunication or a lack of effective communication. In her plan, she laid out that maybe they need to have weekly morning meetings. The tactic was the same time, 8 o'clock. Who was going to lead that? The floor supervisor. The matrix of change had an agenda, and they were going to do that for 2 months. That was a part of their strategic plan. And this component really asked students to move from reflection to application. And I really think in this one, the students were able to see that leadership wasn't just a position or a role, but a set of intentional reflective actions grounded in emotional intelligence, ethics, and self-awareness. The reflections really revealed powerful takeaways, and not only about organizational change, but really about like what they learned about themselves as future leaders. And so with that, does anyone have any questions about our final project or even the emotional intelligence model that we applied or taught?
So I'll just add, it was really interesting. We found that in our summative reflection, 56% of the students mentioned that the surveys that they conducted with their participants for their final projects were really essential to their learning, while only 33% of the students actually mentioned that the strategic plan assignment and their final paper contributed to their assignment. So that was a couple of the things that we found in terms of our lessons learned with the students. So students reported learning much more from personal assessment activities than anything else. So this was something that I think has really stuck with me as I have been designing 2 additional courses in our new organizational leadership and learning program this semester. So really thinking about how am I pulling in more opportunities for personal assessment activities that again connect to these larger concepts and help them think about the interconnectedness of both their learning, their knowledge development, as well as leadership. Community and trust, we saw that this was integral to the feedback loops that came from these discussions where they shared their personal assessment results. So they were actually able to share, get feedback, take that feedback, and continue to work on their own individual growth. Again, the contradictions piece, the types of power and influence they reported as the most important aspect to their learning, but the paper tied to that project was less reported. And so we asked the question, would this topic have resonated as strongly for the students without the actual assigned paper? And when we think about what we just heard about the strategic plan activity and how, many of them said that the survey component was super important to their learning, but then the actual writing of the paper and the strategic plan that used that survey data was less reported. So is it that students just kind of are resistant to the larger assignments? But then we also know that it's those larger assignments that help to actually increase their knowledge. And then something surprising, the final thing, was students' willingness to talk about their gaps in their social and emotional intelligence throughout their surveys, throughout their activities, throughout our large and small group discussions. Students were actually more vulnerable than we expected, particularly in a virtual classroom with a group of students from a variety of disciplines. So we were really happy about their willingness to do that. So thank you for being here with us today. We hope a couple of those resources we shared have been helpful, but we just want to open it up for Q&A, insights, comments, other strategies that you all may want to share. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for the applause. Appreciate that.
I don't have a question, but I took so many notes because I'm thinking about what you're talking about in leadership is applicable across multiple disciplines, as you mentioned. So I'm the program chair for information literacy, which is library sciences. And I'm thinking, wow, this idea of being a conceptual consultant about how we use information literacy every day and everything we're doing does weave in that micro, macro level leadership perspective. And it doesn't matter which discipline. So I found that really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. That's one of the things too, I think that resonated for me teaching this course for the first time with so many students from across the university in various majors and fields of study, and how I was able to then subsequently this fall semester bring into my teacher education courses that I also teach in the College of Education some of these components of leadership, and really helping my teacher education majors think about the aspects that we taught in this course around like thinking about leadership as sort of connected to organizational leadership, to things that teachers, it could be really helpful for teachers as teacher leaders in a classroom. And so this course really helped me to connect multiple aspects and curriculum that I teach in other disciplines as well. So I was really happy and grateful for Chelsea's engagement in designing this course, but then also what the students themselves brought to the course that helped me to then pull some of these other useful aspects into my other work.
I thought this was a really effective way as a doctoral student to be paired with a professor. This is almost like a mini student teaching, right? Like I'm at K-12, you do student teaching for 6 months before you get your teaching license, and you don't really have that in a doctoral program. So this ability to co-develop and co-teach something such as impactful as leadership was really profound in my doctoral journey, which I think could be an opportunity to even model this in future doctoral programs when having internship opportunities for doc students.
And to model in our own program, Chelsea, because you and I just kind of, this was happenstance that it all happened. Chelsea was looking for an internship, had me for a previous doctoral course and had leadership, reached out, we started talking and came up with this plan. We don't necessarily have a model for that that's consistent, because every doctoral student has a different journey or, desire. So yeah, we thought that this went really well and we enjoyed working together.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, questions, insights?
Or even a takeaway, something you're going to take away from this.
Ernest has shared the link in the chat. Thank you for that.
I think many of us in this room are instructors or course developers, and I think what I'm taking away are this idea of what you said, co-developing some sort of leadership strategic plan, and it doesn't matter the concept or the course. Again, I come back, I teach doctoral courses as well, and co-developing research. How are we all going to attack this research? Or with my undergrads, how are we attacking information literacy in our jobs? I really like, I have so many ideas for course development for the next uplift coming up. So thank you so much for all of these great ideas. And thanks to everybody else for their audience participation in today's session. Please use the survey link that Ernest has put into the chat to nominate the TLC presentation for a conference award and to share your feedback on this presentation. Dr. Bryson, Chelsea, do you have any final words for us?
No, not really. Just thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, we hope you all have a fantastic day.
Yeah.
And
You too. Thank you for this. I have so many great ideas I'm taking away.
Good, thank you.
all right, thanks all. Take care.
Take care. Have a great day, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Thanks, Ernest. Have a great day.